Hi, this is Jennifer Agee with Jennifer Agee Counseling and Consulting, and today I'm joined by Michelle Schwartz, licensed clinical social worker with Allies in Therapy. And today we are going to talk about a communication tool that I think can help a lot of people, not just at home and in their relationships at home, but also at work. We're going to talk about the difference between internal and verbal processors. So Michelle, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know you do a lot of work with couples, individuals and couples, and this theme of understanding how one another communicates comes up a lot in what we're doing. Tell me a little bit about what you've experienced or how you explain to clients the difference between internal and verbal processing.
Sure. The way that people process information and then try to communicate it to each other is when a lot of times things go awry. So for internal processors, a lot of times it's like the thought process is happening behind the scenes and they're not saying anything out loud, but they're just processing. And sometimes those people need more time to process. Mm-hmm. External processors, I happen to be one of those.
Me too.
Yeah, we tend to process out loud, so people kind of know what we're thinking, but sometimes the first thing that comes out of our mouth isn't necessarily what we want to communicate in our final, sharing, but we just process out loud. So when you have an external and an internal, that can really cause some issues because there tends to be a lot of assumptions in our communication. So if someone is an internal processor and they're just taking some time to process, sometimes external processors will be like, you must be mad, you're not saying anything. There's that assumption that the other person is mad because they're an internal processor. And if you just check it out with that person and say, are you upset? Usually they will say, no, I'm not upset, I'm just taking some time to process.
Absolutely, and I'm the same. I'm a verbal processor, and so my husband's an internal processor. And we learned long ago that I would have to start the beginning of a conversation if I knew I was trying to think something through with, I'm just thinking out loud. Because yes. Where I start and where I end up are not the same. And sorry, my eyes watering. And where we got into trouble was he was taking everything that I said as an internal processor, and he was taking everything in and thinking that he needed to take action or make decisions or have a comeback or conversation about each thing I was saying. And really, I was doing everything he does in his head out my mouth. Whereas yes. We'll talk about a topic and he'll say, I'm going for a walk. He'll go for a walk. He'll have the world's problem solved when he comes back because he's had time to, let that kind of run around. And that has been a game changer for us, just even recognizing the difference and how to ask for what we need. So he has permission to say, Jen, I just need time to think about this. And so I can step back, give him the time and space, and then I know when he comes to me with an answer, it's been well thought out. It's what he really feels or means to say.
Absolutely. And I think there are, advantages and disadvantages to both. One way of communicating, external versus internal isn't correct, but sometimes, if you don't understand that and you're not asking questions and you don't have that awareness, then you make assumptions like the other person's mad. Or sometimes internal processors will say, well, they just don't care. They're not asking my opinion. They're just, blah, 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 And so there's that assumption sometimes from internal processors. So just really having those conversations and understanding how you process and then how the people around you process, whether it's at work, in your friendships, in your intimate relationships, in every category, just being aware and noticing how people process and express information is so important. And sometimes, especially external processors, we tend to just dive in sometimes and not give people enough time, to really get comfortable with what they want to say. So.
Absolutely. And, when I've had a company hire me to come out and talk about communication and I get to this topic and I talk about how this plays out at work, I can always almost see light bulbs going on like, oh, you mean they're not ignoring me, or they're not trying to participate in the conversation or being standoffish. They're legitimately thinking about everything that we've said, and when they know they will tell us. And
Yeah.
so knowing those dynamics, even on your team, especially if you're in a leadership role, I think can be a game changer so that you can really nurture the needs of the different people on the team and have everyone work to their best and their fullest potential.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
I've even seen where, when people do have teams they have to work within, sometimes the external processors will kind of gather together and the internal processors will kind of gather together, and then things get kind of separated,
Yeah.
and you have to come back together and kind of say, oh, it's not team A and team B. We're all the same team. We just process differently and we express ourselves differently.
Absolutely. And to be perfectly honest, I think sometimes, don't tell my husband this, but I think sometimes when he comes back with an answer, it's a much better answer than what I had because he's really taking the time to think about it, think through all aspects. Where I get so excited about something sometimes that I will just go and I could have 5 ideas, and he helps kind of pair out all that stuff for me and goes, how about landing here? And I'm like, well, that's a good idea.
Right. And I think sometimes we external processors can overwhelm internal processors without meaning to.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, sometimes internal processors need to communicate and say, I need a minute. Like you said, your husband's learned to do that. Hey, Jen, I need 5 minutes to process, and you walk away and let him do that. If internal processors don't communicate that with people, then yes, there are those assumptions. They don't care. They're ignoring me. They're mad. I hear they're mad a lot.
Yeah.
He was way mad, and so asking questions like, well, do you think it's possible he was thinking? Did you come back and ask? Well, no, I didn't. I just assumed he was mad. So I just stopped the conversation. And, so coming back and asking questions, checking things out with people is really important when you're trying to learn to communicate.
That's a great point. Asking, not assuming. Are you moving past this or ignoring me, or are you thinking about it?
Yes.
Being curious instead of making assumptions. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And like you said, asking questions is a much better way to do it than accusing somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess you're mad again. That happens a lot, especially in couples therapy. I'll have, one person say, well, I'm just assuming they're mad, so I just walk away, and they don't come back together to solve it. And then that causes further problems. And there's like scarring, emotional scarring, and, internalizing things that really aren't there. It was just the assumption we made because we ended the communication before it was really done.
Good point. Very good point. So I guess the challenge I would have for anyone that's watching this is have a conversation with the people that are significant in your life, that you spend a lot of time with. Float this idea out there and maybe find out where they think they land on this, internal versus verbal or external. And based on that information, maybe decide how to tweak communication so it can be even better. I think that's a good challenge.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight and for going over this. And I hope it's been helpful, and I hope you all have a great night. Michelle, I hope you have a wonderful night too.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.